Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. It seems to be a very full house. There's room, actually, for another 10 people up here, if anyone wants to sit up the front. So thank you for coming to the session. I guess there must be a little bit of interest in Azure. Just a little bit, perhaps. So I have been working with the product right from the very, very beginning. And the reason I got thrown into it was a customer of mine who I'd worked with extensively with Active Directory and identity management said, "What is this Azure thing?" And I want to run a project, he said. So we actually started very, very early. And I would say in those days, you could actually know the whole of Azure, because there wasn't an awful lot of it. Now it is the most enormous cloud. It's full of amazing functionality. You're never going to know it all. There's no way I can cover it all in just an hour and 15. Yesterday, I did a pre-con on for the whole day, and we covered the really important parts and deep dived into it. So what I'm going to do today is really just give you a, as it's described, bring on the thunder. It's a lightning tour of Azure. So I want to really just show you what is there. There's a lot of really good people downstairs in the sort of Ask the Experts area. And you can go, if something sort of excites you and you think that looks really interesting, go and get more details from that. But I want to start right away and let's get going. So first of all, I just want to look at IT Pro challenges, just to set the scene. We'll then do a quick A to Z of Azure, and I will introduce you to the portals. There are 2 portals. And then I want to look at the resources for running applications. So things we're familiar with. We need compute. Where do we get compute from? What type of compute? We're going to need storage. What type of storage? We're going to need to connect it all together. So what type of networking have we got there? And also identity. And I'm also going to talk about some of the things that have only just been released. So a little bit of word of warning. I'll show you this today. If you go and look at the portal tomorrow, it may be different to a certain extent. And I don't know, when I do my demos, I may find something I haven't seen in the portal. The new portal, the preview portal, the functionality is almost changing on a daily basis. And sometimes when it is classified as preview, so, you know, if it does occasionally fall over, don't be surprised. And what tends to happen is they bring a new piece of functionality in, it may be a little bit rough, and then it's sorted out. Now, it's the functionality of the portal, it is not the functionality of the underlying Azure. If you want to guarantee something's going to work, use the old portal or use PowerShell to do it, or some other management tools. So the actual cloud is very robust, it's just the preview portal occasionally does something a little bit unexpected. So, just starting off, looking at the IT Pro challenges, we've got a whole list of things that we do today. And there was people have been saying, oh, well, as soon as the cloud comes along, there won't be so many jobs. But I want to beam right down to the very last point on there, which match the business requirements by scaling to demand and being agile. That's something we've not been terribly good at. There's been an awful lot of organizations where their data centers are almost maxed out to capacity. And they may be maxed out physically, maybe maxed out on power, they may be maxed out on cooling, storage. But it's very difficult to suddenly bring on another project. So this is a very typical one, is managing demand. And, you know, where do we always come up with new ideas? It's in the bar, isn't it? And then the next day we come in and we say, we're going to sell Ignite Hoochie Coochie 2000 widgets. Has anyone bought one yet? They are amazing. So we're going to do an e-commerce site. And you scratch your head and say, yeah, so how can you forecast? And they say, yes, easy, straight line. And then, of course, you have to go for an entry barrier. This is what you need to get started. So there's a cost. That's what we're going to do, compute-wise, to get kicked off. And then the reality kicks in. And why has it gone like that? Because we mucked up. We, first of all, predicted that we were growing, but we didn't predict enough. So suddenly, we're out of compute capacity, we're under capacity, and the customers are getting very fed up at that point. But most of the time, we've been under capacity. Sorry, we've been over capacity most of the time. And therefore, we're paying unnecessarily for hardware, but also in terms of software licensing. Another real classic is when we have a concert ticket website, or you're selling tickets for the Olympic Games, which happened to us not that long ago. Because you may realize from my accent, I'm not an American. I'm from the UK. And so we were selling tickets. Well, we weren't, actually. Everyone was browsing the website, and then we would allow ticket sales to go online. And so you sort of think, okay, so what compute capacity do we need? And you come up with a lovely line. Then the reality kicks in. And you end up with these little glitches up here, which are CLMs, which are very technical. Anyone know what a CLM is? Yeah, well done. A career limiting moment. Also sometimes referred to as a CV limiting moment. So that is really difficult to deal with. That is probably one of the most challenging things, because most of the time you're trickling along with people just visiting the site, and then suddenly, whammo, the demand just goes through the roof. So how do we deal with it? Well, we need to scale up, scale out. You know, do you have the space? How much is it going to cost you? How long is it going to take you? Do you have the capital expenditure and budget? And the answer is probably not. So what we should do is let the cloud take the strain. Sitting out there are millions of servers just waiting for you and your credit card. And they're there. And there is a huge number of differently sized virtual machines that you can use, depending whether you're going to be running a database, all right, where you may need less CPU but a lot more memory, or depending whether you're doing a high compute, maybe not so much memory, huge number of cores in your CPU. They're all available, waiting. Plus, there's a whole raft of services out there that are ready and waiting. So if you think we need to do some media streaming, and you could say, okay, so what's that going to involve? You know, or we've got to start looking at encoding and decoding and doing all these bits and pieces. It's there in the cloud waiting for you, all right? Don't bother doing it on premises yourself. Leverage what's already there. And then look at what you've got and what you do really well. So if you have applications on premises that do something amazing, you've got a marketplace for them. So you can actually upload them and make them available through the marketplace. So suddenly you're selling this expertise. And I know a number of companies who've actually done that, and actually they're selling their services now through the cloud. On demand, so you decide when you need the compute, when you need the storage, and you just pay for what you use, which is the key. So what we need to look at is what we can do. And number one, we can be the expert at bringing scalability and agility. So when someone says to you, oh, we need a SQL database for a project, rather than going, okay, we need to think about that, couple of weeks, all right? You can say, yeah, half an hour, and you've got a SQL database running. All right? If you don't become agile and you don't become really ready to adopt, what will happen is the people who wanted the SQL database will go and do it themselves, and you'll end up with shadow IT in your organization. And shadow IT is becoming a real sprawl at the moment. So lots of companies are finding these little niches where people have gone straight out to the cloud, and they've actually got things in production that you should be, as IT pros, in control of. The other thing is innovation. Think about innovation. Look what's there and think, can we start using some of these services? So, A to Z of Azure. What is it? It's a platform. And it's a platform for compute, it's a platform for storage, and we've also got the capability of very quickly creating SQL databases up there as well. There's a management API and a fabric that runs it all. So, we need a new VM, some magic works, up spins a VM ready for us. All right? How do we talk to it? We talk to it through a portal, or we talk to it through any number of management APIs. All right? And plugging into those APIs, of course, PowerShell does it extremely well. And then you've got other tools that you can also plug in. Plus, the developers have the option of taking something like Visual Studio, working in Visual Studio, and it will just automatically deploy it into the cloud, right? Which is great for dev. But when it comes to production, that's where you need to be in between and know exactly what's been deployed and how it's being deployed and so on. So what sort of compute do we have? We have things called web roles, worker roles, websites, and virtual machines. In fact, websites have now been renamed to web apps, but things get renamed all the time. And then in terms of storage, we've got things like blobs, tables, queues, and files. Well, probably files you're familiar with, but blobs, tables, and queues, what are they about? We'll come back to that. And then sitting above there is a huge raft of different services that you can leverage. And in particular, extremely good virtual or virtualization of networking. So, two portals. We have the original portal. Actually, it's not the original. There was a portal prior to the old portal, which was the older old portal. And then we've got, so on the left, you've got the sort of, it's sometimes described as the full portal, and on the right, we have the new portal, which is currently in preview. How do we get started? Go and get yourself a 1-month free trial, right? And rather than being able to try this, that, and everything, what they give you is a number of dollars of credit, right? Because you could choose to fire up a VM with 32 cores in it, and goodness knows how much memory, and you could burn that $200 in, very short space of time. Or you could run up a number of VMs and actually try out all sorts of things. If you've got MSDN, how many of you have MSDN subscriptions? Okay, well, out of that lot, which was probably about a third of the audience, out of that lot, how many of you actually are using your MSDN subscription for Azure? Okay, that was less than half. So think of all the money you're wasting each month, because you've got a lot of credit that you can be using and trying. Okay, this I want to mention because it's new. There is now this thing called Resource Manager, or Azure Resource Manager, which is ARM. Concept, previously what we do is we create a virtual machine, we create a cloud service, we create a network, we create something else, and we'd have all these things created. And then if you wanted to get rid of them, you'd have to delete that one, delete that one, delete that one. You could do it all with PowerShell. But it was also a nightmare if you wanted to do things like billing, all right? Because if you have a project, wouldn't it be nice to know how much that project costs? So now we have the idea of resource groups and resource objects. Everything is a resource object now on the platform. So we can create a resource group and we can put things in there. We can put all our VMs for a particular project in there, all our storage accounts, all our virtual networking, all our SQL databases go in there. It's now a life cycle boundary. Delete the resource group and everything gets deleted within it. You can look at billing based on resource. And something that's really powerful that's coming out now is RBAC, as in role-based access control. So now I can manage the resources and delegate administration to it. Azure, you basically had a subscription administrator, a service administrator, and then co-administrators. And everyone could pretty much do everything, except the subscription one actually put the credit card details in. But apart from that, in terms of actually managing the portal itself. Now, there's RBAC, but it needs to be ARM-based, and you've either got to be doing it through the preview portal, or you've got to be doing it through PowerShell. But there are two API sets in PowerShell. There's the original one, which is the Service Manager PowerShell, and then there's the ARM PowerShell API set. And you switch PowerShell over to using the second set. So, lifecycle, RBAC, management, identity, and billing. All right, so now we can create a project and a resource group. So what you do is you say, all of these things make sense to be together because they're part of one project. And now we've got this nice little container where we can do all of that. There's just an example of RBAC, the actual roles that are shown on the right-hand side. So we've got an owner, a contributor, a VM contributor, and so on. Those roles are increasing sort of pretty much, not every day, but on a very regular basis. So this is very much a work in progress. So we're going to have very fine control of how we can delegate permission. There is also now a new concept of a resource group template. So previously, with PowerShell, what you could do is you could script the creation of a virtual machine. But now, using a template, you can actually, and it's a JSON it's a JSON file format, which is like XML, but a lot simpler and a lot easier to use. You can now say that I'm going to create a resource group with a SQL database, with a website, with a VM, and actually I want X number of websites, X number of VMs, X number of storage accounts, virtual network. You can do the whole thing, and you just do it through a single template and build it all. And the new portal is driven off of these templates. And we just simply get if there's a little bit of PowerShell there just to get you started, which is get Azure Resource Group Gallery template. And I put Publisher Microsoft in there, and you'll get about 3 screens worth. If you remove the dash Publisher Microsoft, it will carry on scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling because there's lots of third parties who are producing these templates. And you can produce your own templates. So you can create your own templates for your projects. Want to build a project? Bam, just from template. Delete the resource group, it's all gone. All right, create it again, it's there. Okay, so what I want to do is actually just take you briefly through the portal. And I'm going to start on the old portal or the full portal or whatever you want to call it. There's all my different services that are running, and the subscription I'm running them in is down in this column here. So if I've got the ability to create web apps. Those are basically websites, okay? I'm going to come back to those. Virtual machines I can create. Mobile services. If you want to create mobile apps, rather than thinking, how do I do it? How do I do push notifications, synchronization? How do I do single sign-on? It's all there. It's already sitting there, ready for you to use. So that's something you should think about leveraging. Cloud services, I'll come back on. SQL databases. Once you've done it once, it will take you less than 20 minutes to create a SQL database, open it up in Visual Studio, and if you've got the scripts populated, it's really quick to get up and running. And there's lots of options in terms of database sizes. Storage, I'll come back on storage. HD Insight, this is Microsoft's implementation of Apache Hadoop. And if you know anything about crunching big data and managing big data, that's what this is about. Media services, if you need to bring in a video feed, encode it into lots of different formats, and push it out so it can be streamed out to different device types, then this will do it for you. All right? Just imagine the heartache of trying to do that on premises yourself. It's there. It's ready to use. By the way, things like HD Insight, media services, there are booths downstairs if you want to talk more to people. Service Bus is about connecting applications together. The Visual Studio, obviously Visual Studio Online. Cache is a Reader's cache. And if you like, the simplest way of thinking about that, it is an in-memory database, but it's persistent to disk. So it's unbelievably fast. Again, you can talk to people about that if that rings a bell, it's interesting to you. BizTalk in the cloud, recovery services. We can create storage vaults and do backup. Content delivery network. One of the concepts you'll have to think about is that what we're doing is we have the potential to deploy anywhere in the world. Right? And what you could do is you could just say, I've got my websites, right, actually sitting in the US, but I've got customers all around the world, and they need to be able to pull images. Right? They could pull them off the website, or I can use the content delivery network, which will automatically cache them at edge servers throughout around the world, and it will implement geo-DNS. So if someone's in the Far East, where do they get their images from? One of the data centers that's caching it in the Far East. So that's the content delivery network. Automation is where we do basically create PowerShell. We've got PowerShell playbooks, and it's using PowerShell. It's using using workflow and all the rest of it to go with it. So this is where we create our deployments, automate our deployments, management, and so on. Scheduler is a bit of a funny one. It's a schedule as a service. So it's used in Azure, not on all of the other ones that require it at the moment. Some of them have implemented their own scheduler, but eventually they will use this as schedule as a service. So everything that has a scheduler in it will use this. And what you can do through the interface, and this is why it looks a little bit weird, is you can basically invoke an HTTP or an HTTPS endpoint, or you can drop something into a queue. And the idea is that you have a web app that is listening at an endpoint, and whenever that endpoint gets triggered, you say, oh, it's time to go and do something. So rather than having to do the timer service yourself, you're just basically waiting to be told by scheduler as a service to go and do it. API management is where we create a facade and catalog of APIs so that we can make those APIs much more available and much more usable. Machine learning is really a rename of business intelligence data mining. It's where our data scientists get involved to mine your data. Stream analytics is a sort of key component of the Internet of Things, whereby you can pick up information from different sensors and then in real time analyze that data. Operational insight, that wasn't there yesterday, but now it's there. Operational insight is basically, it will collect information from Windows servers, Linux servers, and you can analyze the performance, and you can make decisions about scaling and all sorts of things like that. So it's a really good, clever bit of diagnostics that we can create. Networks, I'll come back to. Traffic manager. If you have a web farm in the Far East, you have a web farm in the US, have a web farm somewhere else, you can put traffic manager above it, and what it will do is geo-DNS for you. All right, so automatically going to the correct web farm. Remote apps is where we make apps available to our users on different devices, so notebooks, laptops, iPhones, iPads, Surfaces, whatever you want, and you can actually deploy Office 360 or make Office 365 available through that. Management services is where we create alerts and queries. Active Directory, I'll come back on. If that's not enough for you, you simply go to the marketplace and you'll find something you like. All right, so lots of things, and just bear in mind, your product could be up here as well, so other people can find it and pay for it. Store Simple is about integrating on-prem and off-prem or cloud-based storage solutions, and then settings, which I'm not going to go through because I don't want to give away all my my subscription IDs and things like that as it's being recorded, but it's where my subscriptions are held and my administrators, and I set those in. So that's the old portal. If we go to the new portal looks like that, and it's so it's a sort of dashboard as well. And that's the idea. This is referred to, this background, as the start board. And if you double-click it, it changes color, so you can have your dashboard how you like it. And it's a complete nightmare. The first time it changed color on me, I thought, what have I done? How do you get it back? You double-click. I can go and browse for something. So I could browse for my virtual machines, and I can go down here to virtual machines, and it shows me the virtual machines that I actually have running. So I can go further over. I'm just waiting for it. So I can go over to the data machine. It's telling me essential information about its IP address, its VIP address, and I'll talk about those in a second. And then monitoring. So there's not a lot of activity going on there. But what I could do is just right-click, say, print startboard. Go back, home, and there it is. So gradually building up my dashboard. Now, the nice thing about it, and you may have noticed, is if I go, let's go, no, not new, sorry. Whoops, I want to browse again. What I want to do is browse for networking, and that looks horribly like new. That's better. Browse for virtual networks. And each one of these that opens up is referred to as a blade. So as you're doing things, you open more and more blades. So I click on Net 1, it opens another blade. All right? Now, what happens, of course, somebody disturbs you and says, oh, I need you to go and do that. Well, you can go off and do something else. And then you have this concept of a journey. So we can come back here, and we can simply go back to where we were and carry on the work. What I would just want to show you is we can customize all of this. So I'm just going to remove this for the moment. I'm going to remove that tile. And then I can customize this one, and I can change its size. So I could do that, or I could pop it back again, whatever I want to do. And then you think, how on earth do I get that tile back? So you go, add tiles, and there it is, and you're clicking it to use it. You've got to get into this idea. This is all, by the way, written in HTML5. So it's a great tribute to HTML5 and the people that wrote it. But look at that. You just drag it and you drop it back. So rather than sort of having to click on it, and just for a web interface, it really does amazingly well. OK, so that's a quick look at the portal. What we need to do now is actually get into some more detail. So what I want to do is look at the resources for running your application. So what I'm talking about here is compute. So in terms of compute, we've got websites, we've got cloud services, and we've got virtual machines. And we need to understand those. Storage, we've got blobs, tables, queues, and files. We've got the SQL database, which I've shown you already. I want to talk a bit about connectivity and finally finish off with a little bit on authentication. All right? So what is a website? Well, a website runs in an instance, maybe on its own, or it could be shared. It depends on the tier that you use. But if you're using standard, what we can do is we can choose an instance size, which basically you choose the amount of compute that you have. You have the amount of storage. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And then you can automatically scale up. Right? You can manually scale if you want to, or you can have it scale on CPU usage, or how big your HTTP queue is, and it will automatically scale up and automatically scale down. So on the front end of that, you have an automatic load balancer. It supports not just .NET, but Java, PHP, Python, Node.js. So you've got a platform with a very rich framework for running websites on. How do we get a website? We select it from a gallery, if that's what we want to do. Or we simply choose an empty website. Right? And having got an empty website, we can simply use a deployment tool. And it supports most of the industry standard deployment tools. Now, if you want a really simple tool, but actually a very nice one, there's Web Matrix from Microsoft. And you can actually have a website on-prem, test it in Web Matrix, and Web Matrix integrates in with Azure. So if I log into Web Matrix with an Azure identity, what it will do is enumerate all the websites up on Azure and say, which one would you like me to deploy to? All right, so the integration in terms of deployment is extremely good. So what we've got is we can go free, in which case it's free. We can go shared, basic, and standard. And in a moment, I'll explain those in a little bit more. You have a starter domain name of yoursite.azurewebsites.net. All right? If it's free, that's your URL. All right? You have to pay for a little bit more before you can bring your own domain names in. Again, I'll show you that in the demo. Now, what we got is a website which is looked after by Microsoft completely except for the code for the site itself. So it's platform as a service. Right? They provide the web platform, we provide the actual site itself that goes in there. But what about if you wanted to run a continuous job? All right? And you think, oh, goodness me, do I have to deploy a VM with IIS on it? Is that what I really need to do? And the answer is no, because Microsoft came up with the idea of web jobs. And a web job is where we can run a program or a script. We can run it continuously or on demand or on schedule. So although we've got just a website, we've also got web jobs to go with it. So now we've got an additional format, if you like, for our compute. Where do we put this thing? Up to you. And this is actually out of date by 1 day because they've just released the access to a new data center, which I think is East US 2. I think it's East US, or is it Central US 2? I think it's East US 2. So there's a new data center there. This, by the way, doesn't show China. It also doesn't show the government data centers as well, which is another offering. So you decide where it goes. Okay, so what I want to do is go through the process of creating a website. So I'm going to be using the new portal for this, so I've done with the customization, and I should go back and over to here where I've got my browsing, and what I'm looking for is not websites, they're now called web apps. And by the way, web apps is not just about websites, it's about mobile services as well. And what I'm going to do in here is I can see all of these guys, they're all running as free. So what we need to do is go new, and I'm going to go new, and it's under web and mobile. And I could choose this one. Alternatively, I can go down to the marketplace, and I can choose web apps, and I could choose a web app with SQL, a web app with MySQL, and so it goes on. So Jamala, all sorts of different bits and pieces. And if I click on more, you will see even more, but I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to go for an empty website, very quick create. Going to go create on that. And what it's asking me for is a URL. And this URL is Azure, it's going to be azurewebsites.net for the moment. So I need to make sure that this guy is going to be unique. So what I'm going to do is put XTS in front of it. And I'm going to go my web, let's call it my web 2. Now, service plan. The default service plans I've got there are all free. Right? The service plan is a way of grouping websites together. And if I change the tier, I could change them all from free to all to standard. All right? Or I could scale them all at the same time. So it gives me, if you like, this sort of container for doing that. So I'm going to create a new one in here, and I'm going to call this XTS Plan 1. So XTS Plan 1, so that's in there. So, right, let's look at this. View all. So I can go for a premium. All right, let's start down the bottom. Free, doesn't cost you anything. You have a website, you don't have domain names, can't do a domain name. So for developers, there's D1 shared. These are running in a shared environment. And D1 shared allows you to have custom domain names. So it's really for developers to do testing without incurring So lots of charges. Coming up here, what we've got is we can have custom domains. We've got up to 3 instances, but it's manual scaling, so we can't auto-scale. If we go to standard, we can auto-scale. We get daily backups. We get what was called deployment slots, and we can have up to 5 of them. The advantage of a deployment slot is you've got your production slot where it's all working. You can upload a new version of your website into a deployment slot, and then if you know the website's perfect, you can just warm start it and then switch it over. So it comes online, fully operational, or you can test it up there, all right? And then you can actually decide to trickle test it. So it's called testing in production, whereby you've got 100% people coming to the production site, and you say, actually, do you know what? Let's feed 10% of them across to staging, and let's see how staging really performs with customs on it. All right? So we can do that as well. We then got also, notice, we've got the capability of having SSL certs. So you need standard if you want your own domain names with your own SSL certs. If you want to use SSL with free, you can, but of course, the certificate is azurewebsites.net. So it's a wildcard on azurewebsites.net. And then we can go up to the full-blown works, which has 20 deployment slots backed up 50 times a day, and so on. So notice there is a slight difference in cost, so I'm just going to stick with standard. I need a resource group, so this is where everything's going to get grouped together. And I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to just call it RG101. I need a subscription, and I'm going to put in my ultimate subscription and the location. Oh, let's just stick with West Europe, seeing it's already been selected. Well, I'll just show you. You've got the list coming in there. So let's just create that. And that's now showing it's creating. While it's creating, let's go over and browse and have a look at another web app I've actually got, one of my free ones. So let's take this guy here, go across, and under the Essentials screen, what you have, by the way, as a sort of general rule, is the essential details like your URLs, your IP addresses, and so on. And then coming down here, these are referred to as lenses, and we can change the lenses. So at the moment, we're F1, which is free and a shared infrastructure. And for instance, you cannot connect this to a virtual network. So you need to be in standard to be able to do that. And if I come back up here, scaling, I cannot scale this. So I've got no way of scaling this one up. It's got 0 instances because I'm sharing this. I'm sharing it with other people. It's not my instance, so I can't scale it. So was that a friendly notification? Yes, the website's created. Let's go back to it. So if I come back over here and I close that off, so I get a refresh on here. So I go to my web app here, and there's my friendly site, which is running in standard. Okay, let's come over here. And what we'll see coming down, let's go down the bottom first. So in terms of networking, we're going to be able to add that to a virtual network. You actually have to do it in a special way, which I'll mention later. And in terms of scaling, we can do that. And we can scale based on CPU. So CPU, when you get to 80% CPU usage, increase by 1. When it falls to below 60%, decrease by 1. All right? So, and you can add different rules, your own rules. And under rules here, we can go, for instance, memory usage, disk queue length, HTTP queue length. We can decide how we scale. Or we could just decide to turn off auto-scaling and manual scale. We can do that as well. If we just go over to my website, which is here, and it's not going to be terribly exciting once we get there. There you go. It says it's been successfully created and you need to deploy into it. But let me just do this I'm just going to change this. I'm going to put in .scm in the middle, which is Site Control Manager. So all I need to do is change this to .scm, and it's actually going to bring up the Site Control Manager, or hopefully will. And from that, I can actually I can work directly on my site. So they are. I've got the environment details. I've got the debug console. I can drill down to my in here, which is very cool. I can drill down to my site. So I've got my site information, my route, and actually I can drag and drop onto this. So if I had a new site, I could actually drag it and drop it, and if it was zipped, it would automatically unzip it for me. So I think it shows you that actually, if you need, websites, how many of you build IIS servers these days? Quite a few. Yeah, so maybe that's a slightly different approach. Okay, so the next thing is cloud services. Now, this is where we started off. We kicked off in the first place. We actually, in terms of Azure, what Azure had, it was a dev platform for applications specifically crafted for Azure. And you had web roles and you had worker roles. And the concept behind this is a web role runs on a VM. It's not a VM that you're in charge of, right? So basically, a developer develops the web role, and when you deploy it, a VM gets spun up by Azure, and the web role gets whacked onto it, and that's your web role, okay? If it needs to repair itself, that VM just gets chucked away, and a new web role gets whacked on again. The advantage of it is it's highly scalable in terms of you can scale up and scale down, a bit like websites. And we can also have this idea of a worker role in the back end. So what you could do, let's say you had a financial modeling package where you feed data into it, you might just simply need one web role. If you only have one web role, you would fall foul of the SLA, because the SLA requires two web roles, right? So, but we could, in theory, just have, let's match the SLA. Let's have two web roles in there. And then the back end could be listening for financial data being entered, and then it can start computing. And if it gets a little bit stressed, it just scales up and up and up and up and up to do your financial modeling, and then when it's finished, it will scale down automatically. Right? And how do we manage the communication? We do it through queues and tables. So what you have is you create a queue, the web role puts into the queue, and the worker role takes out of the queue. And every instance can be listening. So we've got many front ends. They're all just dumping into this queue, and the back ends are taking out and consuming from that queue. And then you put your answers into a table. This is quite an important concept, so I need to bring this up, which is update and fault domains. And I'm bringing it up in the context of these web and worker roles, but it equally well applies to virtual machines. Right? If you have a single web role, right, how is Microsoft going to service this virtual machine, right, without killing your application? It's not going to be able to do it. So what they have is this concept of update domains. So one instance goes here in one up domain, and another one goes here. And when they come to service, they will guarantee they will finish servicing this one before they start servicing this one, which means although you've lost some of your compute capacity, right, you're still up and running. Right? And that's why you need two of these guys that can be distributed across update domains to get your SLA. And there's also the same concept with fault domains. And here, if you think of a rack has a power supply at the bottom of it, right? It also has at the top of it a switch for the networking. Switch dies, rack dies. All right? So that is referred to as a fault domain. So what will happen is, if you've got two of these roles, they will be two role instances. They will be put across different fault domains as well. So if one dies, it will keep going. And what will happen is the fabric of Azure will immediately recognize that that rack has died. It says, oh, we need to spin up a new VM. We'll spin up a new VM, whack the role onto it, and away you go again. So the actual service healing is really quick. But you don't want to lose your availability, so you need to be able to distribute that. Same thing applies with virtual machines. Now, with virtual machines, if you build a web farm with virtual machines, you want that farm to remain going. So what you do is you put virtual machines into a thing called an availability set. And what an availability set is doing, it's telling Microsoft that these machines need to be available as a service. And so what it will do is it will make sure it distributes them across update and fault domains. Okay, so I want to give you a very, very quick demo of cloud services. And what we're going to do is just use the old portal. The reason being is you can't do cloud services in the new portal. Well, that's not true. As of last Friday, you can. But they're a bit flaky in places, so I don't want to do it in the new thing. You can actually look at cloud services now from last Friday in the new portal. But I'm going to switch the old portal, and I'm going to come up here to cloud services. And what I've got is I've got this cloud service here, which is, where are we? Dashboard. Sorry, I just lost the plot for a second. I've got 2 slots, production and staging. I've got nothing in production, but I do have the cloud service deployed in staging. It actually has 4 cores. There are 4 instances running. It's running in staging, so it's got this really wacky URL with a GUID. All right, and the idea being is nobody else will be able to find that very easily. All right, so that you can do your testing using this GUID on the staging environment. And if we go to that, what we'll find is we should have our little app, and what it's showing is actually it's reading the server name. Server name, RD. RD stands for, anyone know? Red Dog. Anyone heard of Red Dog? It was the code name for Azure, right, in the early days. And so a lot of the servers are named RD something. And if you see RDFE, it's the Red Dog front end, right? And so there's a lot of stories about how it got called the Red Dog, but I'm not going to go into those. Okay, so this is actually showing worker role number 1, instance 0, and it's sitting in fault domain 0, update domain 0. Let's see if we refresh that, what happens. There we go. We've switched over. We've actually gone over to the other instance, and which has been spread. It's in a different fault and a different update domain. All right, so that's because I've got 2 front ends to this thing. I'll come back to blobs, tables, and queues on that shortly, but let's just switch back to, not to there, to, I should have stayed there, sorry. Switching back, and what I've got is my 4 cores. If I go over here, actually let's go scaling first. So I can scale these guys. I can manually scale them like this, or I can scale them, so let's bring it back down to 2. I can scale them based on CPU, or I can scale them based on queue length. And I've got web roles, and I've got worker roles as well. If I look at my instances, I can see all of those, and they are running in my own VM, so I can actually RDP into this thing. So I can connect to it, open it up, and we are actually going to RDP into this VM that is running my web role. Oops, wrong password. And if we go down, in fact, we go down into File Manager, let's just go up. I remain logged in, so it'd be quicker. The E drive basically contains my worker role detail, and actually I uploaded some utilities. So if you wanted to run Processor Explorer up there, you can do so. Okay, so it just gives you a little bit of a feel for what's there, and I'm going to compare websites, these, and VMs in a moment, because you're probably wondering which one should I be using. So the last bit of compute is virtual machines. And with a virtual machine, we need a VHD, right? The VHD is fixed. You can create a VHD on premises in Hyper-V, and you can then upload it into Azure, and you can run your virtual machine off that VHD. So that's one of the options, is to upload. They go into blob storage, right? So we need a storage account to put these in there. You can upload OS images. You can upload data images as well. Or you can create from gallery. And in gallery, you effectively have a sysprepped image. And that sysprepped image will be copied and then started up and fed the appropriate parameters to set its, its host name, etc., and the username, as in administrator name, administrator password. So it's just, how many of you run sysprep on premises? Yeah, so a few people. So the sysprep is basically where we take an image, we generalize it, and then we start it up, and it goes through a mini setup. Right? Well, we sysprep an image in the Azure, and then it starts up, and it gets automatically fed the parameters. Where do you get them? There are lots and lots of images in the gallery, but you can create your own and put them in a gallery. And then the VMs are created. This thing runs, a virtual machine runs inside a cloud service. And a cloud service, in its simplest form, you can think of a cloud service as having a VIP, a virtual IP address, and a fully qualified domain name. Right? So that's the cloud service. These VMs, you can communicate through that public VIP. And what actually happens is everything comes in on one public VIP. And if you imagine you're RDPing into this VM, and RDPing into this VM, and RDPing into this VM, all of these VMs as a local port will actually be using a 3389 as a local port. So what happens is, on the outside edge, you have different port numbers that map to those local ports. So we come in through one IP, but we can get all our VMs individually inside the cloud service. VMs inside a cloud service communicate together, but they can't communicate outside of the cloud service. If you want to do that, you need to set up a virtual network. So which execution model do we go for? Well, it depends how much control you want. If you can do it with a website, great, because Microsoft look after everything. So ease of management, speed of deployment, speed of scaling, it's all there. Right? But it might not do what you need to do because you need the requirements of a virtual machine because you want to run a specific application. Right? In which case, you would go to a VM. The in-between house of running in a cloud service, you have to have the application, the worker role, the web role, specifically written for Azure. However, they do scale very quickly. They're going to scale faster than a VM. So it's a sort of, decision time. In some ways, I would be looking, the simplest thing is to look at websites and to look at virtual machines, unless you want to start actually developing in terms of your developers developing for the Azure platform. Okay, let's just have a very quick look at a virtual machine creation. And I'm not actually going to create one because it'll take too long. But what I want to do is actually show you the creation of this. And by the way, this virtual machine, if I change it, this is my cloud service virtual machine. If I do things on here, all right, it's not persistent, so they'll get lost. because Microsoft will just spin up a new VM and put the worker role on it. If you want something that's persistent, you will need to go to an actual virtual machine and use that. So let's close that down. And I'm going to go through the new portal. And what I'm looking at here in the new portal is a new virtual machine. And so we're looking for compute. And I can choose, there's lots of different virtual machines. Let's just go for this option here, which is a Server 2012 R2. We need to specify a host name. And yeah, interesting. I had this, that's right. I had a problem here. I couldn't get the focus into this blade earlier when I was trying it. It's the first time I've seen that problem. What should we call it? We'll call it my VM. How about that? Username, we're all familiar with, using admin, and it doesn't like it. It's a forbidden name. So you think, oh, I know, I'll be clever. Microsoft doesn't know anything about Linux. But it doesn't like that either. So you go for manager, and one day they'll ban manager. But at the moment, you can get away with that. Okay, pricing tier. So here we go for the pricing tier. Now, not all pricing tiers are available today in all data centers. You can actually look up what's available in each data center. And if you do get Azure location, it will return all the locations and all the capabilities of the location. So you've used a bit of PowerShell to do that. So A0, A3, and it gets just slightly more expensive as we go down, £630 a month, or dollars in this case. No, this is pounds, because I've got a UK thing. And these ones aren't actually available to you here. So nothing that expensive in central US, but if I go over to East US, oh, there's East US 2 turned up. So this is a new region. These are regions, by the way. They're not data centers. A region may have 2 or 3 data centers in it. All right? They're geographic regions. Oh, hang on, what happened there? Oh, I've just created the thing. I didn't mean to do that. I was talking too much. Let's go. Oh, well, actually, I don't know whether I did create it. Never mind. So if we just choose this, and I can go down, and what we'll find, oh, that's getting better. I like the A9 myself, as long as I'm not paying for it. So you've also got optional configurations, so you can decide which network it sits on, a resource group, and just to show you in optional configuration, just to sort of drum that home. In fact, I need a host name in here to be able to do that, I think. Yeah. What you've got is the storage accounts you're going to be using for the VHDs, but also the availability set. Remember, if you want to make sure that one of the VMs, if you've got 2 VMs, is always up and available, they've got to be an availability set. But so if you were deploying domain controllers, for instance, you would actually put those domain controllers into an availability set if you wanted to deploy Active Directory across there. Okay, so that's the sort of compute models. If we go and look at storage, we have this concept of having a storage account, and inside there we get blobs, we get tables, we get queues, and we get files. Okay, blobs, there are 2 types. There are block blobs and page blobs. VHDs go in page blobs. All right, so if you think of it, you can put your VHD files will go into blob storage. Tables are used sort of for communication between applications, right? And queues are used for communication between applications in the cloud service. Files is new, and what it allows you to do is create an SMB share, but it's an SMB share in the storage account. So I can effectively connect from a virtual machine to an SMB share, which is sitting in an Azure storage account. So it was put in there because quite a number of people said, well, if I'm going to deploy this application in a VM into Azure, this application needs to access SMB shares. So Microsoft did it. They listened. They're very good at listening these days. How does storage, well, what does storage look like? When you go to write to storage, what it will do is it will write synchronously to 3 disks. All right? And when those 3 disks have confirmed the write, it will say, OK, you've successfully written. And those 3 disks could be just done as locally redundant storage. They could be as zone redundant, which means they're not sitting in one facility. So they could be sitting in, if you've got a region which actually has, the data centers are enormous. And they could be, multiple football pitches. So you could have one disk in one football pitch, another one in another football pitch, and another one in another one, within the same region. Okay? So it means if one of those got destroyed by a fire, your data would probably still be okay. Whereas if you went for local redundant storage, then if that one facility got destroyed by fire, potentially you've lost your data. All right? If your data is important to you, though, you geo-replicate it, and now it is separated by hundreds of miles. So if something completely blatted that region, all right, took out all the facilities in the region, your data's still over the other side. All right? And you can do geo-redundant storage. What will happen is, if there's a failure in data center 1, Microsoft will do its utmost to get data center 1 working again before it would fail over. All right? It would only fail over if there was a complete disaster. All right? So you may have a time where that data, although it's safe somewhere else, a couple of 100 miles away, you can't get at it. So if it's important to you, you go for read access, geographically redundant storage, which means that this region has just been blatted. All right? Your application can still gain access. This is assuming you have made your application site redundant as well, or region redundant, can still gain read access to the data over here. All right? The difference is basically cost. All right? So you choose what you want to do. In terms of storage access, you can get at storage from anywhere. So we can, it uses REST APIs, which are basically just sort of HTTP methods for getting it, and it's signed by a storage key, which you can get hold of, and you can use in tools to access your storage. And so therefore, if we've got the correct storage key, we can use multiple GUI tools. And the file, if we're using files, we can get access to files using the REST APIs, but also with SMB. OK, so I want to just look at a storage account very quickly. So just going to switch over. And I've got a storage account here, which I'm going to browse to. And where's my... Oh, well, actually, it's... let's do it this way. Again, we can see both my storage. I've got 2 storage accounts. Oh, I've got 3 storage accounts, because I created a virtual machine by mistake. So it automatically created a storage account. So here, if I go to XDS storage, you can see that it's actually, there are the different ways and the different URLs of gaining access to it. And what I can actually do is use my application up here to use the storage. So if I go to blobs, what I can do is I can actually browse for a blob. There's a blob, and upload it. So it's now just gone in from my own machine into Azure storage. It has a URL. Because it's in a public container, I can simply go and access it. All right? Because it's using REST, it uses standard HTTP gets to get that information. If it wasn't in a public container, I couldn't do this, but it is in a public container, this one. If I go back to my application, I've got a way of putting things into a table. So where you can put Ignite into the table. I'll just do one entry. And then I've got queues, and I can drop 20 things into the queue. Okay, let's use Storage Explorer. And I'm going to connect to my storage account. And if I look inside my images, there's my blob that got uploaded. If I look inside my table, there's the table with a table body showing Ignite. And if I look inside my queues, oh, we got 14 messages in the queue, but I put 20 in there. Let's wait for it to go down by what? Okay, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13. Okay, so I've got a worker role at the back end pulling out every 10 seconds. So why is it going down by 2? Because I got 2 instances. Well done. Yes, so I got 2 instances in the back end actually pulling those down. Okay, so this just gives you a feel of the storage account. And when it comes to networking, what we do is we create a virtual network. And a virtual network has an address space. It has subnets on it, which you can name. And we can connect a gateway. And that gateway can actually go site to site. And that site could be Azure to on-premises, or it could be site to site, which is a VNet to VNet. And that virtual network in Azure could be in the same region, or it could be in different regions. So if I wanted to deploy something which was geographically dispersed, I can have those machines communicating on a virtual network. So to get this going, we put a gateway in, and then we put in our site-to-site connections. We can also put in point-to-site. And what point-to-site is, it requires a gateway. So a gateway will go on the virtual network, and then the points are individual clients which need, and those individual clients will have a VPN client deployed on them. So what I can do is I can have a point-to-site gateway on my virtual network, and then on my dev box, I use a VPN to connect to it. And now I'm connected up to Azure to everything on that virtual network. Right? I can deploy VMs onto that virtual network extremely easily. And I can do that. I can just specify the VM to be deployed in the virtual network. Cloud services, web roles, worker roles, they're done through a configuration file, but we can deploy those onto virtual networks as well. So now all these guys are talking. Previously they weren't, because they were in their own cloud service, and they could only talk within the cloud service. If you want to, you can connect a website, or a web app, onto your virtual network. You can't actually say, this website is on this VNet, but what you can do is you can make this website a point on a point-to-site VPN connection. So the website is actually deploying. What will happen is when you choose to do it, it will automatically deploy onto the website the VPN client and then connect in to your gateway. So now we've connected websites, we've connected cloud services, we've connected VMs. If you want to, you can then connect to on-premises with a site to on-premise connection. And what you'll need is at your end, you will need the appropriate gateway. All right? How do you configure your gateway? Well, there's a list of gateways that are supported with scripts. So once you decide and choose your gateway, and your gateway manufacturer and the type, what will happen is Azure will give you a script for configuring it. Right? Now, there's actually a list. If you go up onto the Azure website, you will actually see a list of VPNs and VPN support. I've had customers who, you know, despite the fact their device was not on the list, right? Once they've downloaded a script, they could actually figure out what they needed to do to get their device working. Also, on premises, it supports RAS for Server 2012. So you can actually have your Edge server as a Server 2012 device. Another thing that is reasonably new is if you don't want to go over the internet, you can use ExpressRoute. How many of you use ExpressRoute? Anyone? Sort of couple of hands, half going up. Okay, so ExpressRoute is basically a private network. So you will go to an ExpressRoute provider. It's a private encrypted network where all your traffic will be transferred and you're not going across the internet. Okay. The other thing you can do is for coming from websites, you can use a hybrid connection which actually uses a BizTalk connector. Okay, in terms of managing identity, you may wonder, well, how do I authenticate against all my websites and everything else? You can use the Azure AD. And the Azure, how many of you have an Office 365 account? Okay, so all of those people there, put their hands up. You also have an Azure AD account, because the Azure AD backs Office 365. So the Office 365 tenant is actually an Azure AD tenant. And what you can do with that, you can create your Azure AD. You've got a management portal for it. You've got REST APIs for accessing it. You can synchronize with your own AD. So you can take users from your own AD and synchronize them up into the Azure AD. And then you can authenticate to a complete raft of different applications, including your Azure subscription, Office 365, your own apps, right, using federated access and claims aware. There's an application gallery and, of course, partner apps. So it gives you a way of really federating identity across multiple applications and multiple security boundaries. When you start off with one of these accounts, you will end up with John Smith at yourdomain.onmicrosoft.com, but it's no problem. You simply add your own domains and bring up your own naming into the Azure Active Directory. And there's sort of 2,000 plus, and the number increases, not daily, but it does go up. So, what was that when I did the screenshot? 2,473 apps or something like that. And the idea of these guys is that they use the Azure Vault for your password and key to gain access to the different applications. So you can use your Azure identity to access the Vault, which will automatically seamlessly take you over to these apps. And you've got a My Apps portal. But what I want to do is just show you very briefly, and it is literally a 2-minute demo. I'm going to show you let me just close. I'm going to use a different browser, and the reason I'm using a different browser is that I'm going to have the wrong cookies in my current browser. So what I'm going to do is go to XTS-AAD, and this is a website, and it's a website that's running in Azure, and the website actually checks to see if I have a claims principal identity, and I don't. Therefore, it says you're not authenticated, right? And there are no claims to display. So if I go to my actual portal here, and I can do it in the new portal. So let's go and browse for web apps. And there's my web app, XTS-AAD. And notice it's running for free, so I don't have to be having a standard for this, or basic or any other mode. And if I come over to here, and we just wait for all settings to appear, I can come in authentication and authorization, and I turn it on like that, save it, and now what's going to happen is below my application all the authentication is going to take place. And then when it's passed through to the app, I'm an authenticated principal. Right? This works not only for Windows apps, .NET apps, it works also on other Linux platforms as well. It does this for us. So let's go back over here and let's do a refresh. Okay, so it's thrown me up to the Azure Active Directory, which is branded for my organization. We'll go in as Maria in here. And we're logged in as Maria, or will be. And so, hello, Maria, you're authenticated, and we've got the details of, let's just take that up in size here. So we got Maria's details in there as well. So these are the claims that are now presented. And if you want to, you can have multi-factor authentication and all sorts of other goodies that come with Azure AD. Okay, so in summary, is let the cloud take the strain. And not only let it take the strain for running your applications, use it so that you can actually innovate. And you can not only bring scalability, agility, so you can move quickly, but you can bring innovation to your organization. And if any of those things like the mobile services, etc., thought that sounds interesting, go down to one of the booths and have a chat with the guys down there, and they'll give you a lot more information. So in an hour and 15, that was Azure. If you've got any questions, by all means, come down and ask. And thanks for coming along. Enjoy the rest of the show.